Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So this is the second day we're going to be looking at Malbim because he, I think, takes the symbolism of the Mishkan and just does amazing things with it Yesterday we looked at some sort of introductory notes he had that were almost on a mystical level of looking at the fact that as human beings we're made up of all different component parts, and yet we create an entity. And in that sense, the universe is seen as Adam Gadol, right? Something like that, that you could look at the universe in the same way, that it has various and different component parts, and yet it is an entity. And we can understand it as an entity. And just as we are enlivened by what we believe is something beyond ourselves, which we could say is an element of the divine presence, likewise, the universe is also set in motion by this divine presence that permeates the universe just as it permeates us. And having sort of set that down, I think that's the basic concepts that he set down yesterday. We're going to look at a different parallel commentary that he has, which brings it home, I feel. So I'm going to share the screen, and I hope this is what's going to show up. So I'm actually using a text from Safaria here. There is no translation that I found in English. If somebody knows of one, please let me know. I'll do the best I can. So this is quite philosophical, as some of you may have noticed yesterday. So he's actually looking at the text itself at the beginning of Parshat Truma, and it says, Va'asuli mikdash, and they shall make for me a sanctuary. There is a double entendre there because it could mean, in a way, they shall make a sanctuary out of me. But I think we're just gonna focus on the primary level of the meaning of the sentence. But he goes into this. Kvar be'arti, I have already explained, be'ramzei hamishkan, in the allusions of the sanctuary. And that was what we were reading from yesterday. So if you did not tune in yesterday, you may want to go back and see what we did there. She'inyan hamishkan, that the whole issue of the Mishkan, this tabernacle, haya kvutzat kol nefashot Israel, was the gathering of all the souls of Israel, lekoma shlema, into one. And the word koma, I'm struggling to find a good translation for it. It can mean, right now it's a modern word that means, for example, a stage of a house, right? A floor of a house or of a building. But I think it means, one entity. Let's just call it that, right? To one stature or something like that too. Mityacheset ima Elohut. So this combined souls of Israel relating to the divine Elohut, right? Sheba Olam Hagadol, that is in the grand world, the great world. And that is referring to the universe, right? The great universe. She'olam Hagadol, because the great universe, Hu Mikdash Shalmala, that is actually the upper sanctuary. That is the upper sanctuary. Ve'era Hashem leMoshe, and Hashem, God, showed Moses et Hamikdash Hagadol, this great grand sanctuary, this divine heavenly sanctuary, Bechol Tzvunotav, and all its hidden parts, Uginzav, and its treasuries, Umashkiotav, and I would say possibly it's something that's a simile to that. I looked up this word and I really wasn't finding anything that I found satisfactory as a translation for this. So, She'alze Amru, and this regarding this, it is stated, "Bechol beiti ne'emanhu." This is in the book of Numbers, where God says about Moses to Aaron and Miriam. He says that Moses is unlike other people. In my entire house, he is faithful. Kol her'alo beito hagadol. Ki her'alo beito hagadol. For he showed him, that is, God showed him his great house, v'sodotav, and its secrets, shehu hamikdash hakolel. That is the grand, that is the including, the inclusive, something like that, something that includes everything else, or the general sanctuary, the universal sanctuary, something like that. She'al ze amar, regarding which is stated, or he said, Kachol asher ani mar'e otcha, according to all that I show you. So, She'al ze amar, and regarding this, it is stated, Shebayom hukam mikdash shel mata. So this must be in rabbinic material. On the day that the lower sanctuary was set up, hukam mikdash shel mala imo, the upper sanctuary was also set up with it. So this is also very mystical in the idea of the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. Sheme'az nimshach, because from that point was drawn hashpa'at Hashem, the influence, right, or the presence, something like that, of God, ba'olam hagadol, right? So it was drawn, this divine influence, let's call it that, in the great world, in the grand universe, lefi ha'avodah v'hakdosha, according to the service and the sanctity, b'mikdash shel mata, in the lower sanctuary. The influence of what is of this universe, of our small little world, on the grand universe itself. This is actually sounding a little bit like some modern theories, like the one about the butterfly, waves its wings in Japan and there's storms in Bengal, that kind of thing. V'tziva v'chein ta'aso, and he commanded, thus you shall do, shekol echad yivneh, and that every individual should build law for himself, mikdash, a sanctuary, bechadrei levavo, in the rooms of his heart. And this is a point that is struck home with me, okay, that when we talk about the sanctuary or the Mishkan or the Tabernacle or the temple, it is actually a blueprint for each and every individual human being. Ki yachin atzmo, for he will prepare himself, liyot mikdash lashem, to be a sanctuary to God, uma'on, and a habitation, l'shchinat uzo, for his power, for the presence of his power. Kemoshe katuv, as is written, Hashem leDavid, okay, that Hashem said to David, and this is the book of Samuel, chapter 7, verse 11, Vehigid lecha Hashem, okay, for the Lord has told you, Ki vayit yaseh lecha Hashem, that, and there's a double meaning here, that God will make a house for you. In other words, in that case, the Davidic dynasty. But now in this context, we're taking it in a different way. That here it's just like we had the Beit HaMikdash, that is the way the holy temple, the holy house, that God will make of you a sanctuary, this holy house. Ritzolo lomar, and what this meant, this statement meant, she'ata ba'atzmacha, that you yourself, tiyeh bayit Lashem, a house to God. Ki David haya ragel Regel Revi'i, sorry. For David was the fourth leg, Sheba Markava, in the divine chariot. And you know that in mystical parlance, they talk about the divine chariot, and I believe the other three wheels are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the fourth wheel is David. And the idea of being a wheel of a chariot is because the wheel allows the chariot to move swiftly from one place to another place. And the idea of the divine chariot as being that these people lived lives that brought the presence of God into the world wherever they went, and in a very powerful kind of way. And that's what this divine chariot is really referring to. Over ofan ze kain ta'asu ledorot, and in this particular way, you shall do for generations. Shekol echad, that every individual, yivneh mikdash, should build a sanctuary, bechadrei levavo, in the chambers of his heart, v'yachin mizbeach, and should prepare to an altar, la'alot kol chelkei nafsho l'Hashem, to basically lahalot, to raise up or to sacrifice, right? All the parts of his being, his nefesh, right? Lashem, to God. In other words, this is a way of describing devotion and service to God. Ad sheyimtzor nafsho lichvodo, and to the point where he will hand over his soul in his honor, in the honor of God, b'chol eit, at every moment, kamoshe Amar Avraham, just as Abraham stated, right? Avraham Avinu, Abraham HaPatriarch, va'anochi afar ve'efer, he said to God, I am dust and ashes. And this is a whole new meaning now of Abraham's statement. The idea that after you burn the sacrifice, it becomes dust and ashes. And the idea of devotion, of what it means to devote your life to God. Shechashav et atzmo, because he considered himself, shehu Allah olah la'Hashem, right? That he himself, right, was an olah, right, an offering, an olah. I don't want to translate it as burnt offering. It just sounds in some ways crass, but whole offering, right? Because the entire animal essentially was offered, and understanding that metaphorically, right, to God, for afro, and his ashes, savur al mizbeach halev, they are gathered on the altar of his heart, hanishbar, which is broken, vahanidke, and again, it's like just totally submissive, lifnei kono, before his maker. Yes, David.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, is this where the concept of cremation essentially originates, or maybe not?
I don't believe it does. Cremation
Okay.
actually is contrary to Jewish law, because it says, from dust you are, and to dust you shall return, and God doesn't need help for that process. I'm not aware of cremation ever being a practice, amongst our people, except in modern times. And the idea was to allow the body to return to its natural state. But here, as living human beings, to act in this deeply humble and modest way, this is an aim, right? This is a hope, a direction, more than anything else. I mean, how many of us pragmatically can approach this? But I mean, everyone has to react to it in their own way. But the idea of service and personal service and it's the antithesis in some ways, of course, of a modern way of doing it. Yes, I see two of you have raised your hands, and I welcome your comments. So I don't know who's doing it, so I can't.
Oh, one's
Go.
me.
Okay,
I
you're
think
one
the
of
other
them.
was David, but
Okay.
okay,
Yes.
so we talk about cremation, and after the Holocaust,
Yes.
it's an affront. It was an affront to us to burn those people and not bury them.
Right. That was the idea of where the Nazis were coming from.
Absolutely. It's a
But
total affront. They did it on purpose.
right. The Nazis intended it that way. However, let's
Right.
say this in all fairness, right? Just from a to make sure that every point of view gets a vigorous defense. I'm not saying that this is the motivation for people. For some people, sadly, it's a way to save money. Okay.
Right.
But I think that there's another thought that it's possible that someone might consider doing that to be in sympathy with those who lost their lives that way in the Holocaust. So don't get me wrong, I personally don't hold that sense, but I do understand it, and I understand that in some ways it could be a way of holding solidarity with people who were cremated. I've
That is an interesting idea.
right. I've never heard it articulated, in all honesty,
Hmm.
but I could understand it from that point of view. And if I were trying to defend, that point of view, that's where I would come from. So yeah. But listen, this isn't about cremation. I don't want to change the subject too much because when I read this, I thought it was really so profoundly stated, and there's something very noble about this, right? It part of being a noble person is the willingness to put everyone else ahead of yourself and not putting yourself at the top of the list, and to be willing to, in this case, to serve one's creator. And I thought this was just a very lovely way. This just, of course, that's a personal feeling, and some of you may feel just the opposite. I don't know. I felt that in some ways we had studied long enough together for me to trust you and to share this with you. So
Yeah, no. Thank you for the explanation. I was just coming from the whole, sacrifice, and you hesitated on the word burnt. So I was just wondering if that had something to do with it. But anyway, thanks for the explanation.
yeah,
And
right, right. And of course there are two ways to look at it, right? And that in some ways it's just doing what the Nazis were doing. So you could look at it that way, right? I mean, it's just one of those things that is ambivalent. But
yep.
but again, some of you know that I've been thinking about the fact that everyone seeks significance, and that's what religion tries to provide us. And this is an interesting way of, that applying that principle of whatever you want, give, right? And the willingness to crush yourself in looking at yourself honestly, and in trying to serve God, finding ways in which to serve God. And my sense is that the way in which one of the ways in which you serve God is the way in which you serve others as well. So every individual has to sort of figure that out in some ways. And I think the Torah tries to help us. Right. So this is, by the way, he was referring to Ramzei HaMishkan, the illusions of the Mishkan. So are there any other comments at this particular point? Right. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm going to
Well,
stop.
there's some people that donate their bodies to science, to the medical field. So besides being buried, so that's a mitzvah.
Yes, I mean, you don't necessarily not unless there were circumstances that demanded it, you wouldn't be necessarily donating your entire body, okay? But certainly donating certain organs so that other people can live more full lives is considered something appropriate. There may be there's a spectrum of opinion, and it's possible. I've never read it, that on the very far right, there might be some objections to it, but I can tell you that would be considered a far right opinion. I think most opinions are that this is appropriate. So if you want to donate your corneas or something like that, the only place where it starts to become questionable is liver, because livers, unless things have changed, in terms of the technology, had to be very fresh. And the definition of whether a person was dead or not, you couldn't do it unless you were deceased. Lauren, did you have a?
Yeah, I did read an article maybe 10 or 20 years ago in the OU magazine about this subject. And it was the main article, and it went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with people discussing it. And it was mostly positive, but they wanted you to have some kind of rabbinic supervision in making your decisions as it was happening, because the main concerns were, the ideas of extending both the life of the person who's getting the donation, but also your own life, to making sure that, all considerations were there for your own health and concerns. And it was I found a really excellent and positive article that really affected my opinions about how Orthodox rabbis, look at things that I thought they had this opinion on. But it was so back and forth and so interesting. It's probably available in some archive form, but it's worth reading if you can find it.
Right. No, thank you. So obviously, what the point that the study was today was on a more spiritual, personal level as to, where do we place our lives spiritually? How do we understand our purpose, our individual purpose as a human being? And again, we've talked about expectations and things like that, and how false expectations are a guaranteed recipe for depression. And that, on the other hand, if you kind of anticipate, what life is really about and what's really valuable about living, and on some levels, interestingly enough, and in the context of this broad discussion that we've had about transplants and things like that, and you were alluding to it a little bit, Lauren, is that just because a person is ill and a person is not having quality of life, doesn't mean they need to give it up. That it's something that is in some ways beyond our understanding as to the actual value of that heartbeat and that moment of still existing. Because at least based on what we were reading in both yesterday and today, there is, as long as that heart is beating, as long as that body is functioning on some kind of basic level, there's a divine presence in that individual. And to understand, and also for us to be able to, and I'm speaking for myself as well, to be conscious of the degree to which each one of us has that divine spark in us, which I think could be very helpful in terms of how we look at life and how we value our lives and our own uniqueness. So I'm going to stop. Yeah, go ahead.
If something happens to me and they can't do anything for me, I go into hospice. When I go into hospice, that means people will take care of me until good God calls me again. So it's wonderful that you can say to the physicians, don't do anything more for me. You can't do anything more for me. Just make me comfortable until God takes me. And that's what I want for myself too.
Right. But there is a question. I mean, these now start becoming complex questions on a level of sustaining life. At what level? And I think the position, as I understand it, is that while you can't do anything to hasten demise, you don't have to go to any extent necessarily to prolong a life that is devoid of any quality whatsoever. So if there are things that are, for example, stimulating a person, the example given in the Shulchan Aruch, if I'm not mistaken, is that on the one hand, you moving the bed or moving the patient, which might precipitate that person's demise, is forbidden. But if there's a noise outside the room that is somehow stimulating that person and preventing him from, just relaxing enough to pass on, you can close the window. So there's the hair splitting right over there. Okay.
I think what Harlan's saying, though, is he just wants palliative care.
Right. Which isn't necessarily prolonging life. It's just
right. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not commanded to suffer. Okay. When we're talking about making ourselves an offering to God, it's not saying you need to immolate yourself by any means. So, right. Yeah. No, thank you for clarifying that. All right. Peace. Take care.